when Detective Jack Morgan and his team discover Max, a wounded German Shepherd. In a landfill, they uncover the dark secrets of the Sentinel Project, a classified program that turned police dogs into enhanced intelligence operatives. As they fight to protect Max and expose the truth, they face powerful adversaries, including Martin Crowe, the man behind the project. With courage and determination, Max becomes the key to revealing decades of corruption and illegal surveillance. Together, Jack, Kate, Ellie, and Max take down a powerful network, showing that loyalty, justice, and resilience can triumph against even the most insurmountable odds. What do you think of this story? Are you watching from the US or elsewhere? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to DG Story for more thrilling tales like this one. Your support inspires us to create even more captivating stories. The early morning fog hung low over the outskirts of Denver, Colorado, as Detective Jack Morgan navigated his car down a deserted industrial road. Beside him, Kate Lawson, his new partner, was scribbling notes in her notebook, her youthful energy a stark contrast to Jack's seasoned stoicism. Dispatch says there's been some suspicious activity reported near the landfill, Kate said, her voice tinged with curiosity. Doesn't sound like much, but you never know, Jack grunted in response. After 20 years on the force, he'd learned that the most mundane calls sometimes led to the darkest discoveries. His gray eyes scanned the horizon as they approached the landfill, the acrid smell of decay creeping into the car. As they pulled up, the sight of a lone figure near the trash caught Kate's attention. "Look there," she said, pointing. Jack followed her gaze. A large German Shepherd lay motionless amidst a pile of rusted scrap metal and discarded waste. Its fur was matted with oil and dirt, and its shallow breathing was barely audible. Kate was out of the car before Jack could stop her. "Hey, we should call animal control," he said, but his words fell on deaf ears as she knelt beside the dog. "Jack, this dog is hurt," she said firmly, inspecting the creature. "And it's not just abandoned. Look at this." Reluctantly, Jack joined her. That's when he saw it, a worn, metal collar around the dog's neck. The engraving on it was barely visible, but the letters Sentinel were unmistakable. "Sentinel Project," Jack murmured, his voice thick with recognition. He hadn't heard those words in years. "What's that?" Kate asked, looking up. "A project that should have stayed buried," Jack replied tersely. He stood up, scanning their surroundings with a mix of suspicion and unease. "We need to get this dog out of here. Now." They carefully lifted the dog into the back of their car, its weak whimper a haunting sound that stuck with Kate as they drove to the nearest vet. Along the way, Jack explained, the Sentinel Project was a classified program from 5 years ago. It was supposed to train elite police dogs, enhance their abilities, but it got shut down after complications. "What kind of complications?" Kate pressed. Jack's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "The kind that gets buried deep under red tape, and people disappear when they ask too many questions." By the time they reached Dr. Ellie Carter's veterinary clinic, Kate was bursting with questions, but Jack's grim demeanor kept her quiet. Ellie, a skilled and compassionate vet who had worked with the police before, took one look at the dog and immediately sprang into action. "This dog's been through hell," Ellie muttered as she examined it. "These scars, they're surgical, precise. Someone did this intentionally." Kate and Jack exchanged a glance. "What do you mean?" Kate asked. Ellie pointed to a faint incision near the dog's neck. "This isn't from an accident. And this chip, it's not a standard identification chip. It's something else entirely." Jack's stomach sank. The memories of Sentinel Project flooded back, whispers of experiments, of pushing the boundaries of what dogs could do in the name of security. He'd heard rumors of things going wrong, of dogs disappearing, of scientists and officers who were quietly reassigned or silenced. As Ellie worked to stabilize the dog, Jack paced the small waiting room. Kate sat nearby, scrolling through her phone. trying to find anything about Sentinel Project. Her search yielded little more than conspiracy theories and heavily redacted documents. "Why would someone throw this dog away?" Kate finally asked, breaking the silence. "Because it's a loose end," Jack said grimly, "and loose ends get tied up." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Ellie emerged from the exam room, wiping her hands on her coat. "He's stable for now," she said, "but there's something you should see." She held up a small tablet, displaying the data she had pulled from the chip. It wasn't just identification information. It was a series of encrypted files and a set of coordinates. "What are these?" Kate asked, leaning closer. Ellie shook her head. "I don't know, but this dog isn't just a stray. Someone was using him for something big. And if those coordinates mean anything, I'd bet my license it's tied to whatever got this poor guy dumped in a landfill." Jack stared at the screen, his gut churning. The coordinates pointed to a remote location on the outskirts of the city, one he recognized all too well. "We're going there," he said decisively. Kate blinked. "Wait, what? Shouldn't we call this in?" "No," Jack said firmly. "If this is tied to Sentinel Project, we can't trust anyone. Not yet." As the team prepared to uncover the mystery behind Max the German Shepherd, none of them realized they were stepping into a web of danger, conspiracy, and secrets that would change their lives forever. The following morning, Jack, Kate, and Ellie gathered in the clinic's back room, where Max was resting on a padded table. Despite his injuries, the dog's alert eyes followed their every movement. His behavior was uncanny, controlled, deliberate, almost as if he were observing and assessing them. Ellie leaned against the table, the tablet in her hands. "I stayed up all night trying to decrypt some of the data on Max's chip," she began, her voice laced with both excitement and concern. "I couldn't get much, but what I did find is unsettling." She tapped the screen, showing a map with the coordinates prominently displayed. "This location, it's an abandoned research facility on the outskirts of Denver. It was once leased by a private contractor working with Sentinel Project." Jack crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "I've been there before, back when the project was active. It's not just abandoned, it's wiped clean." Kate, sitting on a stool nearby, frowned. "So why would Max's chip lead us there?" Ellie swiped to another section of data. "That's not all. There's a second layer of encryption here, and it's military grade. Whatever this is, someone didn't want it getting out. Max's condition, those scars, they weren't just surgeries. Someone was experimenting on him." "Experimenting how?" Kate asked, her voice rising slightly. Ellie gestured to Max. "It's hard to say without more data. But his responses, his intelligence, this isn't normal. Even for a highly trained police dog. It's like he's processing information in real time, beyond instinct." As if to prove her point, Max shifted slightly, his gaze locking onto Jack. For a moment, Jack swore the dog understood every word they were saying. He shook off the thought, telling himself it was just fatigue. Kate leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "So, what now? Do we check out the facility? Or do we report this to someone higher up?" Jack's voice was firm. "We don't report anything. Not until we know what we're dealing with." Kate gave him a skeptical look. "You're saying we trust no one?" "I'm saying," Jack replied, his eyes cold, "that if Sentinel Project is involved, there are people who'd rather see us dead than let this get out." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. A few hours later, they were on the road, with Max lying in the back of Jack's SUV. The drive to the facility was tense. The only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional whine from Max, who seemed restless. "You've been quiet," Kate said, glancing at Jack from the passenger seat. "Something on your mind?" Jack kept his eyes on the road. "I've seen this kind of thing before. Classified projects, promises of innovation, and when things go sideways, everyone involved gets buried, sometimes literally." Kate hesitated before asking, Did you know about Sentinel Project back then? What it was really about? Jack's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. I knew enough to get out. That's all you need to know. Before Kate could press further, Ellie's voice broke the tension from the back seat. We're getting close. GPS says it's about 2 miles ahead. The facility came into view as they turned onto a dirt road. It was a crumbling shell of a building, overgrown with weeds and surrounded by rusting fences. Yet, there was something about the place that made Max stir. The dog stood up, his ears pricked, his nose pressing against the window as if he recognized it. Looks like someone remembers this place, Kate said softly. Jack parked the car a safe distance away. Stay close, and stay quiet. Inside, the facility was a maze of empty hallways and abandoned labs. Dust coated every surface, but it was clear that someone had been there recently. Footprints disturbed the dirt, and some of the equipment, though outdated, showed signs of use. Ellie scanned the room with a flashlight. This doesn't look as empty as you said, Jack. Jack's jaw clenched. People like Crow don't leave anything to chance. They moved deeper into the building, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Max led the way, his movements precise and purposeful. It wasn't long before they found what they were looking for. A locked steel door at the end of a corridor. Let me guess, Kate muttered. This is where the creepy stuff is? Jack ignored her, examining the keypad next to the door. It was still operational, though heavily outdated. Ellie stepped forward, pulling out a small toolkit. I might be able to bypass this. While she worked, Kate noticed something etched into the wall beside the door. A faded logo of the Sentinel Project, accompanied by the phrase, "Innovation through control." That's not ominous or anything, she muttered. Ellie finally got the door open, and what they found inside made her gasp. The room was filled with old filing cabinets, racks of surveillance equipment, and crates marked with military insignias. But the most chilling sight was a series of large kennels, long since empty, their locks broken. This is where they kept them, Ellie whispered. Jack moved to one of the filing cabinets, rifling through folders. They didn't just train these dogs, they enhanced them. Max wasn't just a test subject. He was part of something bigger. Ellie pulled out a file from one of the crates, her eyes scanning the pages. This says they were experimenting with neural implants, enhancing the dog's cognitive abilities, making them capable of processing and analyzing information like human intelligence. Kate stared at her. And they thought this was a good idea? Ellie didn't answer. Instead, she held up another file, her face pale. Jack, you need to see this. Jack took the file and opened it. His expression darkened as he read. It's a list of operations, missions these dogs were sent on. Half of them involve taking down organized crime. But the other half, blackmail, Ellie finished. Surveillance on people in power. They were using these dogs to gather dirt on anyone who posed a threat. Kate's stomach turned. That's why the project was shut down. It wasn't just unethical. It was dangerous. Before anyone could respond, Max let out a low growl, his body tensing. Jack instinctively drew his weapon, motioning for the others to stay quiet. From somewhere deeper in the facility came the sound of footsteps. Jack motioned for everyone to stay quiet as the footsteps grew louder. Max stood rigid, his growl low and deliberate, his eyes fixed on the hallway behind them. Kate whispered, "Do you think it's Crow's people?" "Doesn't matter who it is," Jack said, his voice a quiet growl. "Stay close, and if things go south, run." Ellie clutched the files she had gathered, her breathing uneven. "If they've been here recently, they won't let us walk out with this," she whispered. Jack nodded grimly and gestured for them to move toward the back of the room, where a secondary door led into another corridor. Max stayed at the front, sniffing the air, his posture sharp and alert. His movements were eerily precise, as if he were calculating every step to ensure their safety. The footsteps stopped, followed by silence. Jack signaled for the group to halt, his gun drawn, Moments later, a metallic clink echoed through the air, the unmistakable sound of a rifle being loaded. "Move now," Jack hissed, ushering them toward the side door. They slipped through just as a flashlight beam sliced through the room they had left. Jack waited until everyone was through before pulling the door shut as quietly as possible. Kate's voice was barely audible as she spoke. "What if they find us? We're trapped in here." "We're not trapped," Jack muttered. "We just need to get to the car." Max, however, didn't seem interested in retreating. The dog turned down the dark corridor, his pace picking up as if he knew exactly where to go. "Where's he going?" Ellie asked, clutching the files tighter. "I don't know," Jack admitted, following him cautiously. "But right now, I trust him more than anyone else." They trailed Max deeper into the facility, passing empty labs and broken-down equipment. The air grew colder, the scent of rust and mold heavy in their noses. The sound of footsteps behind them had faded, but Jack wasn't taking any chances. Max suddenly stopped at a door marked "Restricted Access, Level 4 Clearance Required." He pawed at the door, then looked back at Jack with a sharp bark. "What's in there?" Kate asked. "Only one way to find out," Jack said. He examined the lock. It was digital, but old, like the one Ellie had bypassed earlier. "Ellie, can you?" Before he could finish, Max stood on his hind legs and pressed his paw against a small scanner next to the keypad. To everyone's astonishment, the scanner beeped, and the door unlocked with a soft click. Kate blinked. Did that dog just open the door? Ellie was speechless, her eyes darting between the scanner and Max, the implant in his chip. It must have been programmed with clearance data. Whoever worked here trusted him enough to give him access. Jack pushed the door open, and they stepped into a small, dimly lit room. In the center stood a large terminal surrounded by outdated but functional monitors. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, and in the corner, there was a single kennel, its door ajar. Ellie moved to the terminal, her hands trembling as she tapped the keyboard. The screen flickered to life, displaying rows of encrypted files. This is a data hub," she said. "It looks like it was used to store everything Sentinel worked on." "Can you access it?" Jack asked. Ellie nodded. "I think so, but it's going to take time." Kate scanned the room, her flashlight beam catching the faint outline of paw prints on the dusty floor. "Looks like Max wasn't the only dog in here," she said. Jack crouched near the kennel, inspecting it. Whoever left this place tried to take everything, but they didn't clean up perfectly. "These prints are fresh." Ellie's voice interrupted. "Got it. There's a list of names here: officers, scientists, even politicians. They were all involved in Sentinel." She frowned. "And here's something else: protocols for neural implants. They weren't just training these dogs. They were monitoring them." "Monitoring them how?" Kate asked. "Like surveillance systems," Ellie explained. The implants allowed the dogs to record audio and video, track movements, and even process behavioral patterns. They weren't just gathering intelligence, they were building cases. Jack rubbed his temples, the weight of the revelation sinking in. That's why they shut it down. The dogs became too powerful. They knew too much. Kate leaned over Ellie's shoulder, reading the screen. "These logs, it looks like some of the dogs started acting outside of their training. They were making decisions on their own, connecting dots the people running the project couldn't see." Ellie looked up at Jack. "Max is one of them. He's not just trained, he's enhanced." Suddenly, the sound of heavy boots echoed from the hallway. Max's ears perked up, and he barked sharply, positioning himself between the group and the door. "They're here," Jack muttered. He motioned for Ellie to back up the data. "Copy everything you can onto that drive. We're leaving." Kate grabbed a metal rod from a nearby table, her heart racing. "And if they catch us?" "They won't," Jack said, his voice steady. "Max with me. Ellie, Kate, stay behind me." The door burst open, and a group of armed men poured in, their faces obscured by masks. Jack fired a warning shot, and Max lunged forward, his movements a blur. The first man went down as Max clamped onto his arm, disarming him in seconds. The room erupted into chaos. Kate swung the rod at another assailant, catching him off guard, while Jack covered Ellie as she frantically worked on the terminal. Max moved like a shadow, his enhanced reflexes outmatching the men who tried to subdue him. "Got it," Ellie shouted, holding up a small external drive. "I've got the data." "Then we're done here," Jack barked. "Let's move." They fought their way back through the facility, Max leading the charge. The dogs seemed to anticipate every move, guiding them through side corridors and hidden exits. By the time they reached the car, they were battered but alive. As they sped away from the facility, Ellie clutched the drive to her chest, her face pale. "This isn't just about Sentinel," she said. "There's more to this. Something bigger." Jack glanced in the rearview mirror at Max, who was lying in the back seat, his breathing heavy but his eyes alert. "Yeah," he said grimly, "and we're in the middle of it." The safe house Jack had chosen was a dilapidated cabin nestled deep in the forests outside Denver. It had been abandoned for years, but Jack knew it well. It was one of his old haunts from a time when he trusted fewer people and carried more secrets than he liked to admit. The group huddled inside, the cabin's single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Ellie set the external drive on the table, her hands still trembling from the chaos at the facility. Max lay nearby, his eyes darting between each member of the group, as if sensing their rising tension. Kate leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Her face was etched with suspicion, and her voice cut through the uneasy silence. "You've been here before, haven't you, Jack? This isn't just some random safe house." Jack didn't look up from where he was cleaning his weapon. "I told you, I've been around." "No, I mean Sentinel," Kate pressed. "You've been involved in this from the start, haven't you?" Ellie froze mid-sip of her coffee, her eyes darting between them. Jack's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "Why don't you tell us what you know?" Kate's tone was accusatory now, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Because every step we've taken, you've acted like you knew what was coming. That facility, Max, even the people chasing us. You're not surprised by any of it." Jack set his gun down with a thud and finally met her gaze. "You want the truth? Fine. I was there when Sentinel started. Back when it was just an idea, a way to give us an edge in law enforcement. They told us it was about protecting people, about creating something that could help us see what humans couldn't." Ellie leaned forward. And it worked," Jack said bitterly. "Too well. The dogs didn't just follow orders. They started connecting the dots, seeing patterns we couldn't. They uncovered corruption, organized crime, even people inside the department who were dirty." Kate frowned. "That sounds like a good thing." "It was," Jack said, "until the wrong people realized how much these dogs knew. Crow and his buddies, they didn't want a tool they couldn't control, so they shut it down, called it a failed experiment, and buried everything." Ellie's voice was soft but cutting. "Including the dogs." Jack nodded, his eyes heavy with regret. "The ones they couldn't contain were dealt with. That's why Max is so important. He's one of the few who got away." The room fell silent, the weight of Jack's confession hanging in the air. Kate's expression softened, but her voice remained firm. "Why didn't you tell us this sooner?" "Because knowing too much gets people killed," Jack replied. "You think I wanted to be part of this again? I walked away for a reason." Ellie broke the tension by sliding the external drive across the table. "Well, we've got the data now. What do we do with it?" Jack opened the files, his face hardening as he scanned the screen. The list of names was longer than he had expected. Officers, politicians, even CEOs of major corporations. And at the top of the list, in bold letters, was Martin Crow. "There's more than just names here," Ellie said, pointing to a folder labeled Protocols. "These are the procedures for the neural implants. They weren't just monitoring the dogs. They were using them to gather intelligence on everyone." Kate's brows knitted together. You mean spying? Worse, Ellie said. These logs show that some of the implants were experimental. They were trying to use the dogs as data processors, analyzing patterns, predicting behaviors, and not just criminals, civilians, politicians, even their own people. Jack's hands clenched into fists. It's not surveillance, it's control. Kate looked up sharply. So Crow and Steele were using the dogs to manipulate people? Blackmail them? Ellie nodded grimly. That's what it looks like. And the moment the dogs started figuring it out, they became expendable. The sound of a phone buzzing broke the moment. Kate pulled hers from her pocket and frowned at the unknown number flashing on the screen. Hello? A deep, distorted voice answered. You're digging where you don't belong. Detective Lawson. Walk away now. And this ends quietly. Kate's heart raced, but she forced her voice to remain steady. Who is this? That doesn't matter. The voice replied. What matters is that you're meddling in things you don't understand. Hand over the dog and the files, or you'll regret it. The line went dead before Kate could respond. She lowered the phone, her hands shaking slightly. They know where we are. Jack cursed under his breath. We need to move. Before anyone could act, Max suddenly sprang to his feet, his ears pricked and his posture rigid. He let out a deep, guttural growl that made the hairs on the back of Kate's neck stand on end. They're here, Ellie whispered. Jack grabbed his gun and motioned for them to stay low. Ellie, get the files, and Max, Kate, cover the back door. Don't let anyone in. The cabin fell into chaos as shadows flickered outside the windows. Flashlights danced in the darkness, accompanied by the faint sound of footsteps crunching on leaves. Kate took up position near the back door, her heart pounding. She could hear voices outside, low and deliberate. Sweep the area. They can't have gone far. Max barked sharply, drawing the attention of the intruders. Jack fired a warning shot through the front window, buying them precious seconds. We need to get out of here, Ellie shouted, clutching the drive. Not yet, Jack growled. We don't lead them to another location. We hold here. Kate hesitated for a moment, then turned to Ellie. There's another problem. That call. They mentioned Max specifically. They know exactly what he is. Ellie's face paled. If they get their hands on him, they won't, Jack said firmly, his eyes blazing with determination. Over my dead body. Outside, the voices grew louder. Kate braced herself, gripping her weapon tightly. Max moved beside her, his growl low and steady. She glanced at the dog, and for a moment, she felt a strange sense of reassurance. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a partner, and if they were going to make it out of this alive, they'd need him now more than ever. The shadows outside the cabin thickened as the footsteps closed in. Jack crouched near the front window, peering through the crack in the boarded-up frame. He counted at least 4 figures moving in the darkness, their flashlights slicing through the night like searchlights. Their movements were deliberate, calculated. These weren't amateurs. We're boxed in, Jack muttered. His voice was calm, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed his concern. Kate pressed herself against the back door, her weapon drawn. Do you think they're here for Max or the files? Both, Jack said. But if they take Max, they'll have everything they need to clean this up for good. Ellie knelt by Max, her hand resting on the dog's back. Despite the tension in the room, Max remained unervingly focused. His ears twitched, tracking every sound, and his body was coiled like a spring, ready to act at a moment's notice. Ellie whispered, if they're this determined, they won't leave without a fight. They won't get one, Jack said firmly. He pointed to Ellie. Take Max and the files. Use the back route through the crawlspace. Kate, go with her. I'll hold them off. Kate shot him a sharp look. Like hell you will. You won't last 5 minutes out here alone. Jack glared back. I've been doing this long before you were out of the academy. Stick to the plan. Before they could argue further, Max barked, a sharp, commanding sound that cut through the tension like a blade. Jack turned to see the dog staring at him, his body rigid and his eyes locked on the door. It wasn't just a bark of warning. It was as if Max was telling him something. He knows something, Ellie said, her voice trembling. Jack, I think we need to trust him. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the front of the cabin. The intruders were making their move. The door shook violently as one of them tried to break it down. Jack raised his weapon, aiming for the frame. Ellie, Kate, go now, he barked. Kate hesitated, her instinct to stay and fight warring with her trust in Jack's orders. But Max nudged her leg with his nose, as if urging her forward. Fine, she muttered, grabbing Ellie by the arm. Come on. They scrambled toward the crawl space, a narrow passage that led to the tree line behind the cabin. Max followed close behind, his movements quick and purposeful. Keep moving, Kate urged Ellie. We have to put distance between us and them. Ellie glanced back, her face pale. What about Jack? He'll find a way, Kate said, though her voice betrayed her doubt. Meanwhile, Jack held his ground as the door finally gave way. A masked man stormed in, rifle raised. But Jack was faster. He fired once, hitting the man in the shoulder and sending him sprawling to the floor. The second man hesitated, but only for a moment before another shot from Jack sent him diving for cover. 2 down, Jack muttered, his breath steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. But he knew he couldn't hold them forever. He needed to buy Ellie, Kate, and Max more time. In the forest behind the cabin, Ellie stumbled over a fallen branch, nearly dropping the external drive. Max stopped beside her, his body tense as he scanned the area. Kate pulled her to her feet. We don't have time for this. Ellie nodded, clutching the drive like a lifeline. Where are we going? Kate glanced around, trying to orient herself. There's an old ranger station about a mile from here. If we can get there, we might be able to call for help. Max barked again, this time sharply, and darted ahead of them. Looks like he knows the way, Kate said. Let's go. Back at the cabin, Jack was out of bullets. The remaining intruders advanced cautiously, their rifles trained on him as he crouched behind an overturned table. He glanced at the back door, knowing his time was running out. You don't have to die here, one of the men called out, his voice cold and mechanical through the mask. Just give us the dog and the files, and this ends. Jack smirked, though his body ached with exhaustion. If you want them, you'll have to dig through me first. The man sighed. Suit yourself. Before the intruder could pull the trigger, a blur of fur and teeth erupted from the shadows. Max slammed into him, his jaws locking onto the man's arm with a ferocity that sent the rifle clattering to the floor. The other intruders turned in shock as Kate and Ellie burst through the back door, weapons drawn. Miss us, Kate quipped, firing a warning shot that sent the remaining men scrambling. Jack stared at them in disbelief. I told you to leave. And miss all the fun? Kate shot back, pulling him to his feet. Max stood over the disarmed man, his growl low and menacing. The man didn't dare move, his face pale beneath the mask. Ellie rushed to Jack's side, inspecting a shallow cut on his arm. Are you okay? She asked. I'm fine, Jack said gruffly, but we need to go. Now. They regrouped in the forest, moving quickly through the dense underbrush. Max took the lead, guiding them with an uncanny sense of direction. Despite the danger, Jack couldn't help but marvel at the dog's intelligence. Max wasn't just leading them, he was anticipating their next move. As they reached the ranger station, Kate glanced back, her brow furrowed. Why did Max come back for us? He could have kept going. Jack didn't answer immediately. He looked at Max, whose steady gaze seemed to hold more understanding than any animal should possess. Because he's not just a dog, Jack said quietly. He's part of something bigger. Ellie set the drive on the ranger station's desk, her fingers trembling. This isn't over, is it? Jack shook his head. No, not even close. Outside, the sound of distant engines rumbled through the forest. Their pursuers weren't far behind, and the game was far from over. The ranger station was quiet except for the hum of the small generator powering the lights. Ellie plugged the external drive into an old laptop she found on the desk. her hands moving quickly over the keyboard. The data began to load, and rows of files, names, and coordinates filled the screen. Jack stood by the window, scanning the forest with his binoculars. "They're regrouping," he muttered. "We don't have much time." Kate was pacing behind him, her nerves clearly frayed. How do they keep finding us? This cabin? The ranger station? Are they tracking Max? Ellie looked up from the laptop. "It's not Max. It's the data. This drive contains more than just files. It's sending out a low-frequency signal, like a beacon." Jack turned to her, his expression grim. "And you didn't think to mention that sooner?" "I just figured it out." Ellie shot back defensively. "Whoever designed this didn't want the data to stay hidden. It's meant to be found, but only by the right people. Then let's make it harder for the wrong ones." Jack said, "Can you disable it?" Ellie hesitated. "Maybe, but if I do, we might lose access to some of the files." Kate interrupted, her voice sharp. "We don't have a choice. If they catch us, we'll lose everything anyway." Jack nodded. "Do it." Ellie began typing furiously, her fingers flying over the keys. Max, who had been lying near the door, suddenly stood and let out a low growl. Jack immediately stiffened. "They're here." The sound of engines grew louder, followed by the crunch of boots on gravel. Jack peered out the window and saw 3 black SUVs pulling into the clearing. Men armed with rifles spilled out, moving with military precision. At the center of the group was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a suit, Martin Crow. Of course he came himself. Jack muttered. Kate joined him at the window. "That's Crow? He doesn't exactly scream retirement. He's not here to reminisce." Jack said, "He's here to end this." Ellie's voice broke through the tension. "I've disabled the signal, but I've only downloaded about 70% of the data. The rest is still encrypted." 70% is better than nothing. Jack said, "Can you move the files to another device?" Ellie nodded. "I'll need a few more minutes." Max barked sharply, his eyes fixed on the door. Jack grabbed his gun and motioned for Kate to take up position. "Ellie, get behind the desk. Kate, cover the entrance. If they breach, we hold them as long as we can." Kate frowned. "What about the files?" Jack's expression hardened. "We protect them, no matter what." The first warning came in the form of a single gunshot that shattered the station's window. Jack fired back, forcing the attackers to take cover. The firefight erupted in earnest, bullets ripping through the wooden walls as the group inside scrambled for cover. Max moved with uncanny precision, staying low and positioning himself near Jack. The dog's instincts were sharper than ever, his growls and barks perfectly timed to warn them of incoming threats. "They're flanking us," Kate yelled, firing a shot at one of the attackers who had moved toward the side of the building. "Keep them pinned down," Jack barked, reloading his weapon. Amid the chaos, Ellie continued to work, her fingers shaking as she transferred the files to a second drive. She glanced up only briefly when Max darted toward the door, his body tense and ready to spring. "What's he doing?" Ellie asked, her voice rising with panic. "He knows what he's doing," Jack said, though he couldn't hide the worry in his voice. Outside, Crow stood behind the SUVs, watching the scene with cold detachment. He gestured to one of his men, who carried a strange-looking device, a small handheld transmitter. "Activate it," Crow ordered. The man pressed a button, and a high-pitched frequency filled the air, inaudible to the human ear but immediately affecting Max. The dog let out a pained yelp and stumbled, his movements suddenly erratic. "They're using the implant," Ellie realized, her heart sinking. "They're trying to control him." Jack swore under his breath. "Ellie, can you block the signal?" "I don't know," she said, scrambling to check the laptop. "This isn't just a tracking signal. It's a command override. They're trying to force him to obey." Kate fired another shot, taking down one of the attackers, but her frustration was evident. "We don't have time for this. Do something." Max struggled to regain his composure, his growls turning to whimpers. But then, to everyone's shock, he steadied himself. His ears twitched, his posture stiffened, and he locked eyes with Jack. "He's fighting it," Ellie whispered in awe. Jack crouched beside Max, his voice calm but firm. "You can do this, buddy. You're stronger than they think." Max let out a sharp bark, his resolve clear. He turned toward the door, his body coiled like a spring. "What's he doing now?" Kate asked, her voice edged with panic. Jack's eyes narrowed. "He's taking the fight to them." Before anyone could stop him, Max bolted through the broken door, charging straight into the fray. The attackers barely had time to react as the German Shepherd tore through their ranks, his speed and precision unmatched. He disarmed one man, then another, his movements a blur of teeth and muscle. Crow watched in stunned silence as Max approached him, his growls low and menacing. For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed the man's face. "Stand down," Crow barked, aiming his pistol at the dog. But Max didn't falter. He lunged, forcing Crow to stumble back, his gun clattering to the ground. Inside the station, Ellie shouted, "The files are transferred. We've got everything." "Good," Jack said, grabbing the drive. "Then let's end this." Kate fired a final shot, taking out the last of the attackers. The group regrouped outside, where Max was standing over Crow, his teeth bared. The man was on the ground, his hands raised in surrender. "It's over, Crow," Jack said, stepping forward. "You've lost." Crow sneered. "You think this changes anything? You have no idea how deep this goes." Jack leveled his gun at Crow's head. "Then let's dig." The sun began to rise over the dense forest, casting its pale light across the bloodied clearing outside the ranger station. The battle was over, but the tension lingered like a storm cloud. Crow knelt on the ground, his hands zip-tied behind his back, his face a mix of fury and resignation. Jack stood over him, the external drive clutched tightly in his hand. Max sat beside Jack, his fur matted with dirt and blood, but his posture was steady. The dog's eyes never left Crow, as though he knew the man was still dangerous. Kate broke the silence. "What now? Do we hand him over to the FBI? The press? This guy isn't going to rot in a regular cell. He's got connections everywhere." Jack stared down at Crow for a long moment before speaking. "We don't just hand him over. We make sure the whole world sees what he's done." Ellie stepped forward, holding the laptop with the decrypted files. "The data's ready. Names, dates, operations, it's all here. This is enough to take down more than just Crow. Steele, those CEOs, the whole damn network." Crow chuckled bitterly, his voice dripping with contempt. "You really think you've won? You're playing a dangerous game. The people I work for, they don't lose." Jack knelt beside him, his expression cold. "You just lost, and when this gets out, so will everyone else you've been protecting." Crow's confidence wavered for the first time. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "Neither do you," Jack replied, standing up. "Max isn't just a dog. He's living proof of everything you've tried to bury." By mid-morning, the group had made their way to a small radio station on the outskirts of Denver. Jack knew the owner, a retired journalist named Sam Higgins who owed him a favor. Sam's eyes widened as Jack placed the external drive on his desk. "What the hell is this?" Sam asked. "Everything you need to blow the lid off the Sentinel Project," Jack said. "I need you to send it everywhere. News outlets, government agencies, everyone." Sam hesitated. "You realize if I do this, it's not just Crow who'll come after you. This is going to make you a target." Jack smirked grimly. "I've been a target my whole life. One more won't make a difference." Sam nodded and got to work. Within minutes, the files were being transmitted to media outlets across the country. Encrypted backups were sent to trusted journalists, ensuring that even if one copy was suppressed, the truth would still get out. As the files spread, the group waited tensely in Sam's small office. Crow sat restrained in a corner, his face pale as his phone buzzed incessantly with messages he couldn't answer. Max sat across from him, his eyes unblinking. "You're making a mistake," Crow said, his voice quieter now. "This won't end with me. They'll come for you." For all of you. Jack crossed his arms. Let them try. Kate, who had been pacing the room, stopped suddenly as her phone lit up. It's happening, she said, holding up the screen. Crow's name is all over the news, so are Steele's and everyone else in those files. Ellie leaned over to look, her face lighting up with relief. It's working. Not long after, the sound of approaching sirens echoed through the street. Jack and Kate stepped outside, their hands raised as FBI agents and local police surrounded the building. At the head of the group was an agent Jack recognized, Special Agent Rebecca Harris, someone he trusted from his time on the force. Jack Morgan, Harris called out, lowering her weapon. You've got a lot of explaining to do. Not here, Jack said. We've got Crow inside, and a whole lot of evidence to go with him. Harris signaled her team, and they moved into the building. Crow was dragged out in cuffs, his face grim but silent. As he was loaded into a black SUV, he turned to Jack one last time. This isn't over. It is for you, Jack said. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from the Sentinel Project rocked the nation. The files revealed decades of corruption, illegal surveillance, and the systematic exploitation of enhanced police dogs. Steele was arrested after trying to flee the country, and several high-ranking officials were forced to resign. Max, hailed as a hero by the media, became a symbol of resilience and justice. News outlets ran stories about his role in exposing the scandal, and donations poured in to support Ellie's clinic, which had become a sanctuary for other retired working dogs. One evening, Jack visited Ellie's clinic to check on Max. The dog greeted him at the door, wagging his tail but still maintaining his calm, focused demeanor. You've done good, buddy, Jack said, kneeling to scratch behind Max's ears. Better than any of us deserved. Ellie approached, a soft smile on her face. He's adjusting well, but are you sure you don't want to take him? He listens to you more than anyone. Jack shook his head. He belongs here, with you. Besides, I think he's earned a little peace. Ellie nodded. We all have. As Jack drove away from the clinic, he reflected on everything that had happened. The Sentinel Project had been meant to control, to manipulate, but in the end, it had created something far greater. Max and the other enhanced dogs weren't just tools. They were guardians, protectors of a truth that no amount of corruption could bury. In the rearview mirror, Jack caught one last glimpse of Max standing at the clinic gate, his silhouette framed by the setting sun. The dog stood tall, a silent testament to the power of loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between man and animal. For Jack, Kate, Ellie, and Max, the fight was over, but the legacy of what they had uncovered would live on, a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed it.